panelists we'll learn from and about shortly, and to all of you online. This is our first experience with a hybrid model, and we are committed to finding ways to have multi-access, because during COVID, we really learned that we were able to extend our audience. And so also physical presence matters, and the Tri-Faith Initiative as a model of co-location, bringing together a church, a mosque, and a synagogue with an interfaith center with the intention of building a neighborhood, peaceful neighborhood, is what we are trying to model in this conversation around diversity and thought today. So, wow, you guys are a little intimidating, but I think we're going to do this, right? It's all good.
It's all good.
Yeah. First, I want to start with Tim Burke. When I was first named interim executive director of the Tri-Faith Initiative, and I've been on this journey 15 years, I was a founding board member. I went to my first meeting with a community CEO to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that first meeting for me was with Tim Burke at Countryside Village at Starbucks.
That's right. I remember that now.
Yeah. And Tim did for me what I'm sure he has done for many others in this community, which was he was vulnerable and authentic. And he showed me by his example that he cared about me as a whole person, and he offered himself as a whole and vulnerable person to have a conversation about why each of us as unique individuals with our intersecting identity matter. And so as I learned that Tim was stepping away from his leadership position at OPPD, and watched how OPPD has modeled bringing up leaders from within, diverse leader from within, I thought it so appropriate for us to host our first conversation in this center by honoring Tim. So Tim, thank you for all that you're doing. For all you have done and all you will continue to do, and may you go from strength to strength with your family, who's so ready.
Yeah, well,
sure.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that.
So we're going to learn a little bit more about Tim, and then we'll go into a broader conversation. But and Carmen, why Tim is a leader in your world and in your eyes?
Well, a lot of the things that you talked about, Wendy, I mean, Tim, in the work that I had the opportunity to do with the chamber, and we worked alongside each other, CEOs for Code. He's a leader on so many fronts. I mean, I think about OPPD and what it is and what it means to the community, and his leadership, how we've seen it continue to evolve as an organization, but also the culture. And that has been largely led by Tim, and also his ability to lift people up within the organization and to let them lead as well. And so, you know, he's out there because of his job, but he's also out there because, as you said, he also makes himself vulnerable. I too remember a conversation that I had with Tim. We had been working in the diversity and inclusion space together, but we had a very, very meaningful private conversation that I will never forget on the heels of everything that happened in 2020. And I was vulnerable, he was vulnerable, and we were just two people that showed up having a conversation. And I appreciate, you know, his ability to be so impactful, but also to be so authentic and personal as well. So ton of respect, and so happy for you, Tim, and just thank you for everything that you've left us with in the community. So we appreciate that.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
Joe, how can you add on about Tim's impact?
That is hard to follow. I met Tim about 15 years. I was involved with a new diversity and inclusion initiative at OPPD, and Tim was in the pilot. And even then, 14 or 15 years ago, Tim saw this work and cared about it in a way that not all of his peers did. He didn't have to be convinced. He didn't have to be convinced that there was a business case that just made sense. It was obvious to him. So it's been very cool to see him continue to succeed as a leader. And as he's done that, he's never lost track of that. He's kept diversity and inclusion at the forefront, not just inside of OPPD, but also in the community. I think he's made a very unique contribution.
Thank you. At the Tri-Faith Initiative, we call that bridge building, bridging difference. And I invite all of you to be inspired by Tim's journey and to join us. I hope you learn more about both the Tri-Faith Initiative and this journey that Omaha is on around diversity, equity, and inclusion today, and feel invited in to do the work with us moving forward. So now a little bit more about each of you as individuals. Carmen, perhaps you can go first. Can you share a little bit about you, your role, and what's core to your identity?
Sure, a little bit about me, my role. So I'm president, CEO, and owner of North End Teleservices. We are a contact center company in Northeast Omaha. And where I'm at today, I feel is a culmination of everything that I've ever done in my life. You know, the love for business, but also an understanding of the impact that business can make on people's lives. And I was taught that by one of my mentors, Marilyn Carlson Nelson, with Carlson Companies. You know, she really taught me that one of the best ways that you can help the community and help people is by job creation. But then also a passion for people and a passion for really a little Pollyanna, but the greater good. You know, as I continue to age, I have come to learn and understand that for me, my life is not my own. And so the work that I do, the work that I get to do, and how I get up every morning and know what I'm going to do for the day, it really is centered on trying to advance people from all walks of life. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion is just core to who I am. It's core to my family as well. We traveled the world being a military family, and we never just landed anywhere. We became a part of the culture. If you have dinner at our house, who knows what you're going to have. It's a little bit of everything that we encountered in our travels. And so, you know, I really try to see people for who they are and to make them a part of, and to lift people up and make people people's lives better. So I think that there's a lot of, I have a lot of hope for where we're at, but there's a lot of work to do. So.
We'll come back to you. Joe, tell us a little bit more about you, or a little bit about you, and some of what is core to your identity.
I don't know why I have to keep following the carpet. Aside that. So I do professionally, I do workplace diversity and inclusion work, and I've been doing that work as an external consultant for about 14 years. Before that, I did it internally. I've done that work almost the entire time that I've been in Omaha, and I think similar to some of the things that Carmen said, that work is one of the essential things to my identity. It's not just a job; it's an expression of my values, my aspirations, my beliefs. I think the work that I do and being a parent, those are probably the two things that are central to my identity, and they kind of drive and shape those things in my life.
Thank you. I'm gonna let you talk about yourself.
Yeah, I don't like doing that at all. So, you know, I think for me, you know, being a leader of a relatively large organization, you really get the opportunity to do a number of different things. You can look at ways to improve things within the organization, but I think you really have an accountability, very similar to what Carmen has said, is to do things outside. I mean, you have an accountability and a role, and this is how I've kind of approached my life professionally, is not only focus on doing the right things inside an organization, but also how can you be impactful outside the organization and doing those right things, whatever those right things may be, and engage those right things and be a voice, a strong voice, to be a leader around those voices. And I'll be honest with you, it sometimes it can be a little lonely on the outside of those, because you don't have a lot of people that are joining you in that conversation. But you know, as I announced my retirement, and we had one of our last executive committee meetings of the chamber, I had a chamber member, a very strong leader of a large organization, essentially say, if it wasn't for Tim, some of the statements and some of the positions that you've taken, that you were persistent on, that you were engaging around, I don't think the chamber would have done things. Now, I know David's in the audience here, and I know David and Carmen would have continued that, but it's that voice that allowed other voices to occur around the table that were impactful. And that's kind of how I see my role as a leader, both inside the organization and outside the organization, is to allow those voices, those conversations, and those actions to occur.
So today's theme is to talk about the diversity of thought and belief at the Tri-Faith Initiative. And so Joe, we'll let you go first on this one. Joe is a member of our board, which I'm grateful for your service to this organization. But why show up to have a conversation about diversity of thought and belief at the Tri-Faith Initiative?
Partly because you asked me to, but beyond that, I think it's an important conversation. I think there's a lot of ways that human beings can be different. One of those is in our beliefs, and there's a lot of religions and there's a lot of belief systems out there. There's a lot of interpretations and experiences inside those religions and belief systems. There's a lot of diversity just right there. And I think, like any kind of difference, we have to have an intentional relationship with it so that it doesn't become, so it becomes a bridge instead of a barrier. So I'm a big fan and a big supporter of the work that the Tri-Faith Initiative does because of that. I believe strongly in being very intentional about those beliefs.
Thank you. Carmen, we're having this conversation today because you posted a link on LinkedIn about an article about the diversity of thought and belief, and I was inspired by that message that you shared. Why did you post that? What does it bring up for you, and why show up to have the conversation about it here today?
Diversity of thought really brings up for me, as Joe said, that there are so many different dimensions of diversity. And one of the ways that my organization has chosen to at least try to express the broadness of what diversity and inclusion means and what we're hoping to build and cultivate within our organization is we say that it is diversity of thought, work and life experiences, and all the other dimensions of diversity that are seen and unseen. And oftentimes it's the things that we can't see externally that get overlooked when we have the conversations about diversity. And so I use a very simple example. I have 5 sisters. And on the outside, you might think that we are very much alike, and we are. But you put us at the dining room table, and you're going to get a lot of different thinking. And it's important that the power of our differences is acknowledged and also put into play, because that is what makes change happen. I think that's what makes organizations and communities better. And so, we don't want to just look at diversity from a singular point of view. It's very expansive and very powerful as well. So it's an important conversation to me because I show up a certain way and people assume a certain thing about me as well. But as I shared with you, the spiritual, the faith element is a very important part of who I am and how I show up every day. And I want to be able to do that. And I want other people to be able to do that too. And I think when we understand each other, we're able to overcome fear and we find how we're similar more than our differences.
Certainly, we have found in our work that people negotiate both their conflicts and their successes with the lens of their faith identity. And so I really appreciate you adding that to the conversation. To build on this conversation, Tim, the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the why, and maybe a little about the how.
Yeah, so very interesting from my perspective. The work that we have done at OPPD, and I'm just going to talk about You know, the last 6 years of my role as CEO, you know, we had one female as part of our senior team. Today, 50% of our senior team is female. We had a member from the Latino community that joined us 4 years ago. We have a member of the LGBTQIA community that is part of our senior team. That diversity of thought has been incredible in my mind. The decisions and the capabilities that we have around that table with that diversity of thought, because of their experiences, their backgrounds, whether it be personal, whether it be religious beliefs, whether it be business background, has really made our decisions more effective for the organization, for our employees. Our whole approach to COVID-19 has been built on this diversity of thought about how we're going to treat our organization. As an example, is the most recent, one of the most recent examples. But then the one that I think you're going to see, I think, in the community coming up in the fall is this whole Powering the Future work that we're doing about the future of our business and how this business is going to be operated in the future. It's that diversity of thought that's been absolutely critical. And as I see us in the organization, it's not just having that diversity of thought, but it's really beginning to understand and having that discussion and the dialogue to understand and to have that back and forth conversation. And so part of the how that we have been on this journey is to engage our employees around these conversations. And so June of 2020, we had 2 of our leadership huddles around racism, all the activity that was going on with George Floyd and just a lot of other things going on, not just across the world, across the United States, but in this community. And then in the fall of 20, we had a full town hall with all of our employees around racism. It's around having this discussion and conversation and beginning to have an understanding of people's perspectives and insights, as well as the work that Joyce and Joyce Cooper and Mark Sedke have been on about creating these gatherings. You know, I've met individually with 137 members of our people of color gatherings and our professionals, women professionals gatherings, just to understand their background, their experiences, their perspectives and their insights about our organization, about how we treat people in the organization, about their experiences in the community. And I tell you, that has really formed my perspective as a leader about how important my leadership role is within the organization.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the messages, Joe, I learned from you when we were speaking together was about psychological safety. Tell us why that's important to this conversation and adds on to what Tim just spoke about.
Yeah, Tim spoke about the understanding piece. It's one thing to have access to diversity of people and diversity of thought, but the understanding layer is pretty important after that. I think when I think about the work of inclusion, I think it's largely about creating spaces and places where people who are different from each other can tell the truth to each other and be heard. You and I are part of the same organization or the same community. Can I tell you the truth about who I am? Can I tell you the truth about my perspectives on the work that we have to do? Can I tell you the truth about my experience in this building? Can you hear me? And I think that's what a lot of this work is. It's maybe not the entirety of it, but it's a big chunk of it. I'm going to be better and healthier if I can tell the truth about those things. And the team and the organization is going to be more well informed as well. And I think there's just a little bit more work there than a lot of leaders think because they don't feel the risk maybe that their supporters. And so that's where the work of psychological safety comes in. Psychological safety is just being intentional about making sure that it's safe for people to be vulnerable. Like, can you disagree with your boss? Can you share bad news? Can you admit failure? Because if in reality or perception it's not safe to do those things, they're not going to happen. And the leaders in the organization aren't going to have access to that information. So I think psychological safety is really kind of foundational part of that inside the organization.
So from a business side, you know, we've done things like training on red teaming, right? That allows people to raise their hand and say, I don't necessarily agree with you, or I think it's a different perspective, or I want to red team this discussion and conversation going in the right or wrong direction. Joe did some work for us. And as we do our engagement surveys with employees, we've identified several questions that line up very clearly with psychological safety. So from a business perspective, we're actually measuring that. and measuring that improvement. And not only are we seeing engagement scores go up because we're very focused on it, but we're also seeing those elements of psychological safety begin to improve because we're having those conversations and allowing that discussion to occur and being very open on it, open about it. So.
Thank you. So Carmen, you're here flanked by two white men who have incredible intentions and open hearts. What's the lived experience of this conversation?
For me, the lived experiences, I mean, I know Joe and I know Tim and I know their authenticity. And so I can have a conversation with Tim. I can have a really tough conversation with Tim. And we've had some really tough conversations. You know, the coming from a place of good intention, I think one of the things that as a Black woman leading this work in my organization and leading it within the community, I have to be okay with being a teacher and letting the conversations evolve. And that's how I approach the work that I do. So the lived experience, you know, there are times when I get irritated and I don't want to have the conversation. There are times when, you know, I feel like, why should I have to teach you how to treat me? Right? But that is so true on so many levels in our community. And, you know, I think if we come from a place of believing good intent and the positivity of the possible outcome and the impact that that can make, then I think we can have these really hard conversations because we are just ourselves, right? And we are coming from the point in time where we are emotionally, where we are physically, what our lived experience has been. And we have to have room for that. We have to have room for that. And so, you know, I'm willing to have the conversations. I'm willing to lead in this space because, you know, as I said, I have come to understand that once I'm gone, I'm hoping that there's something better left for the next generation. And if that means, you know, being vulnerable and having really hard conversations, but also in a lot of ways demanding that we move forward and we progress with this work. And you don't have to do that necessarily in a way that, well, I guess I do demand it. I do demand it. We have to do this work. It is what is going to be required to see our community continue to advance, our state, and globally, quite frankly.
So
I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
I'll follow up.
Okay.
So I think you did, but some of the things that I'd like to know more about is that you have spoken to your identity as a Black woman, and you have referenced how the intersection of faith is also core to your identity. Can you share any experience about bringing that conversation of freedom of thought and belief related to faith into the workplace?
Oh, absolutely. So when I was working for Carlson Companies in Minneapolis, I had the bright idea of let's have a conversation about faith in the workplace, and the attorneys got involved. So I was leading our diversity and inclusion work, our social responsibility work, and it was a conversation that had to go through channels, but it had to progress step by step. You know, it was the first time that the organization had considered having that conversation, and the mere fact that it ended up with the attorneys was quite pleasing to me because everyone was thinking about it at every level. And ultimately, the CEO made the decision. We sat down and she said, you know, let's do this. And I said, yeah, let's do it. It was one of the most incredible events that we ever held at Carlson Companies. We had 20 people representing different belief systems. So whether we called it faith or spirituality, whatever the case was. And the only thing that we asked is that participants just be respectful. And it was really about learning and asking hard questions to gain understanding. And just the power in the room from the conversations that were being had. But prior to starting the event, we had a group prayer. And it was a group prayer in 20 different ways. And everyone, I think, walked away from that experience with a new level of possibility, some new relationships, some better understanding, overcoming maybe some of the thinking that was had previously. And I'll share one more with you. In my own business, I relied upon my faith every single day as we were trying to build that business. And I finally got to the point with my team where I just said, you know, is it okay with you if we pray? And if it's not okay, you know, that's okay too. And however you choose to have that expression of prayer, whether it's in silence, whether it is in agreement, is it okay? Because it was important to me that I start to build a company where everyone felt like they could have that expression if they so chose. And to this day, we still gather and we pray in different forms together for our business and for the community and what we're trying to do. So as a CEO, you don't always get to lead with that. You don't get to bring that part of your whole self. But again, if I can't do it myself, then you know, how can I create a culture where other people can do it?
I might add to that if I could, because I think it's, to me, my experience is when you have the opportunity to talk about whether it's religion or peripheral thoughts, and I know, you know, part of early in my tenure as CEO, we had to make some very difficult decisions, and when people said, "How do you make that decision?" and I've said, you know, I've actually prayed about it, right, to make sure that I've thought and our team has thought about all the right things, and it aligns kind of with the head, heart, and the soul, and when they align, then to me it's a really strong decision. And when we've shared that in town halls across our organization, I think it's given people the freedom to the psychological safety piece, Joe, the freedom to know that they have leaders that are thoughtful and prayerful in that manner, and that gives them the right, so to speak, to be prayerful and thoughtful in their manner, whatever that manner looks like. And to me, I think it releases the organization in some respect to allow that conversation to occur. That's the power of it.
And I'll just add to that, when there is an expression of faith and belief, an outward expression of faith and belief, it starts to surface. You start to find others that believe the same way that you do, whether it is, you know, it may be a shared belief, but I see in our organization expressions of faith that interestingly are very much intertwined with culture as well. And so that just continues to cultivate an environment where people can bring their whole selves. And when you're able to do that, and I see that in my organization, the performance, the connection, the commitment to each other in the organization is something that you can't teach or make up. If I were to say my organization ran itself, I would be running myself out of a job, which is fine. But their passion for each other, their passion for our joint vision and our culture is what really, really drives us forward. And people flourish, they absolutely flourish.
So as a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist, and we're having this conversation again, now through the lens of a Christian majority, having an opportunity to find prayerful moments in the workplace, what red flags does that bring up for you, and what opportunities are there?
Well, I think the opportunities are top of mind, just in listening to what Tim and Carmen have said. I think regardless of what aspects of a person's identity we're talking about, I think there are consequences to making them turn it off for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. I think there's consequences to them, to their family, to their organization. But I think a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders think that's a little bit safer and more neat and orderly. And in the short term, maybe it is. I think there's, as we've heard, there's benefits to allowing people to bring their authentic self to the workplace. We do have to make sure that it's safe and that everybody can do that in different ways and that people can express in different ways. And I think we have to be pretty intentional and explicit about that because majorities have an impact. It's different to be in the minority. It's a different way to experience. It's a different way to show up. And so I think as long as you're balancing that with some safety and some intentionality, I think you can do it well.
Right. As we've been developing curriculum for our religious other inclusion work, which is consulting in the workplace about this conversation, we are finding whether there are some legal questions about whether people have the ability to have a religious symbol in their cubicle, to have a floating holiday or opportunities to bring their religious expression within as a marginalized or minority voice into the workplace. Are they also invited in? So that psychological safety piece and cultural competence, right? For the people in the C-suite to know the needs, to be able to really understand whether you have opened the container and created a safe place, requires an increase in religious literacy and cultural competence. And I don't think it's always intentional to other someone from a different religious identity, but sometimes it's just lack of knowledge.
And I don't think it requires intention either. I think just the presence of a majority can make it easy for some people to feel excluded and not welcome like they don't belong.
Yeah. How is this uniquely an Omaha conversation, this big tent conversation of a shifting landscape? How is it impacting our business sector? Where are you seeing this conversation go next as leaders?
Well, to me, it's the work that the Omaha Chamber has done in Omaha 2040, and the focus about this increasing diversity impact that's going to occur in this community over the next 20 years. It was the research that was done and the data that was put together to say this community is going to change. And I'm going to give an example because I know Javier Fernandez is on the call here today. He gave this great example to a relatively high political official in the state about you not only have to have more diverse tomatoes in your garden, but you have to have the soil that is nurturing, that is accepting of that. And we as organizations, I think, have to create that soil in our organizations to make sure that we can plant more tomatoes and they can be healthy and growing and populous across our gardens. I stole that from him, and he's sitting in my office now in this virtual call. My old office, it's his office. I know that it is his office. So I thought I could steal that, but it's a great, I think, metaphor of the work we need to do in the community is to make sure that our community garden has the ability to be more inclusive, to allow that diversity to be an expression of who we are. Rather than to be divisive, rather to be inhibited, rather to be a conflict related impact to the community. And that's the work our community has to do. But I think it does start with communities of companies. It starts with leaders in organizations and leaders in the community to make sure that we do that. So thanks, Javier, for letting me steal that. So.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that has to happen for us to continue doing that is I think people have to understand that not everyone else is having the same experience here that they are. I think a lot of people grade or evaluate their community or their neighborhood based on their own personal experience. But we're all having different experiences here. Omaha is not the same thing for everybody. I think helping more people understand that, helping more leaders understand that, makes it easier to get them involved in that work that Tim's talking about.
I read this morning that there are more children of color than people that are not of color in the world today. And, you know, as you think about the 2040 in our community, that there will be more people of color. And then you add, again, you don't just take that I'm a person of color, there's all of the other dimensions of me as well. And so that just, you know, a different light bulb went off in a different way, because we've heard, people of color will be the majority in 2040, 2050. But it's, our children today. And so I find myself, and I'm happily so find myself having a conversation 50% of my time every single day, at least, is on this topic. Whether it's inside of my organization, whether it's through, the speed dial conversations I have with Bianca, with the chamber, or with you and Bobby, and Joyce and the members of Code, and the chamber leadership. The conversations that I'm able to have with David and other leaders that are really thinking on this subject, and not just about color, about how we as a community continue to till the soil, fertilize the soil, prepare the soil for all the great things that are coming in our community. We're working on it. We're all working on it.
How do you find a balance between having a unified team and diversity of thought?
I have
An answer.
I do. You do not want people sitting at your table saying, yes, 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 we all agree. If that's happening, I'm out. I want that healthy friction. And it's fun. It's fun when you have an environment where you can watch the team go back and forth and watch the ideas and the strategies evolve into something crazy and wonderful. So that healthy friction.
How do you foster that?
I tell them I don't want to be the talking head at the head of the table. But I want their ideas. I want the diversity of thought and the ideas. And so it is creating the safety to have those conversations, to bring forth ideas, to question what we're doing, question each other. And it always the outcome is something innovative. For us, it's exciting and fun, maybe a little crazy, but you have to be intentional and you have to create the culture and the expectation. I want different ideas, and if I'm not getting them, I'll call for them.
How do you foster that?
No, I would absolutely agree with Carmen. I think you can do it very intentionally. You can make sure that the voices around your table, whatever table that is, has the opportunity to provide their insight, perspectives, and feedback, and to make sure that everyone has that opportunity to do that. And we've done some formal things where, as I said before, where we've done some training on red teaming, whether you're raising a red flag or whether you're doing a bandana, or somebody will put it on their head and just say, hey, I'm gonna challenge this conversation. It's going too quickly to a solution, and I'm not sure we've thought about all the impacts to it. And we've had some spirited conversations. I said on my final comments at the board meeting, we've laughed, we've cried, we've argued, we've gotten up and walked out, but committed to come back. And we've been able to do that for the benefit of the organization, for the benefit of the employees, for the benefit of the community. That's the positive impact to all of that. But yet sometimes have to be very intentional to make sure those perspectives and insight are heard around the table.
What about public disagreement versus at the corporate table? In that idea of having a unified public message versus this idea of multiple thoughts or lived experiences, as Joe was proposing.
Yeah, I'll give just a recent example. So several years ago, OPPD, part of the development of our OPPD Pride, which is our ERG for our LGBTQIA community, began to fly the Pride flag during the month of June. If you look and understand the colors of that Pride flag, it really does match very clearly with what our mission and our vision is at OPPD. But it really is a representation, not only internally, but externally to our employees, about our commitment about inclusion. But I can tell you that that is not necessarily shared publicly in the same way. And the calls and the emails that I've responded to, have used religion as a basis for us not to fly this, or to use a political statement that you shouldn't be political, where my conversation is just about being inclusive. And being a practicing Catholic, I've shared with them my perspective around inclusion is that, Jesus was very inclusive about people around him, of a variety of different backgrounds and experiences, and of good and bad and whatever that may be. And our job is just to be inclusive. And in this example, for the month of June, we're flying the Pride flag, but I can tell you, I don't get a lot of emails about reliability or about bills, but I do get emails around that. Now, this year, correspondingly, I probably received as many emails about, thank you for that commitment. Thank you for taking on that conversation in the community. And I think it's important for us to be able to do that. But it is one of those topics that will polarize people very quickly around that. And so our commitment has been, we're going to take on that challenge as a public entity, as a consumer that we serve all customers in Omaha, about this is part of our very visible statement about being inclusive, about we are going to make sure that, we have one of our core values that we honor our communities. It's just not cities or counties or townships. It's about communities of people, right? It's about people in North Omaha, people in South Omaha, people that have disabilities and have difficulties with our services at times. It's about all the people in our community, and it's part of that overt statement that sometimes creates that conversation. I address it straight on, and I just call people, and I think they're surprised the CEO of an organization will call them and begin to have this conversation. And there are times where we just have to disagree, but this is part of our commitment to our employees. But I can tell you what we hear from our employees inside the organization that represent that community of people is amazing commitment about them being able to bring their authentic self to work, and an organization that's willing to accept them and be publicly supporting of that. That's what I receive in the organization that I think is incredibly positive. And then I know we're increasing our engagement, which improves our performance, which improves our customer service, which improves our revenue capability. Those are all good things for the business. So.
While you're all starting to think about a question you might have for this panel, we'll give Carmen a chance to maybe tell us about a public win or challenge related to the same of where maybe you haven't had agreement around diversity of thought, but have been vulnerable about that.
Well, I think in 2020, and there are plenty, but I think in 2020, as we as a community were and as a business community, we're really thinking about how we wanted to respond to the unrest that was happening in our country after the murder of George Floyd. There was a lot of discussion with some of our leaders around specific words. And, some of the words were hard to say. There was a question of was it his death? Was it his murder? Right. And, having the conversation to get comfortable around, maybe not agreeing 100%, but trying to get to the truth, trying to get to the heart of the truth, and getting comfortable with speaking the truth. So, again, approaching it from a relationship conversation, trust, I think is one of the ways that you can get through the public disagreement. In my former life as a consultant, I worked as an executive coach and consultant to some very large organizations in diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of my clients was a faith-based commercial organization. And when the subject of pride came up within that organization, and there was a lot of thought, and there was dissension from the customer base that said, if this is the route you're going to take, then we don't want to be a part of it. And part of my role is to help facilitate the leadership through what are you standing on? What are you really saying? And as Tim expressed, you know, what I think a lot of organizations ultimately get to is it is inclusion, it is acceptance. You don't always have to agree with the words or the beliefs or whatever it is, but it's still creating an environment where all people have not only a seat at the table, but they also have a voice at the table as well. And so I think that's one of the ways in which, you know, what are we really saying? What are we going to stand on? Or are we going to let our own personal beliefs get in the way of you know, the bigger issue or the bigger conversation?
Joe, what's the how for that? You know, when you're going in and training people, you know, at Tri-Faith, we want to be a model to help cultivate inclusive environments. We want to invite people to celebrate difference. But what are some takeaways that the audience might have today in the workplace that might be helpful?
Well, I think Carmen and Tim both gave good examples. Carmen talked about the question of what do you stand for? And I think that's the way to navigate through these questions. As an organization or as an individual, what values are you leading? What values are going to shape the conversation? I think a lot of people, a lot of individuals find their personal commitment to this work by getting clarity on their core values. If they spend time doing that work, if they spend time thinking about what their faith tells them, what their core values are, they're able to find some personal connection, some personal commitment to this work. And I think organizations are the same way. If their values have real currency, if they're using those values to make decisions, that's the way to navigate. Otherwise, it's complicated because there's so much overlap today between identity and politics. So many of these conversations get framed as political when they're not necessarily political. There's a political lens on them, but they're questions about humanity, questions about acceptance, or questions about inclusion. And so I think anchoring them in values makes it a little bit easier to do.
Thank you. Bob Freeman, I see you have your hand raised. Unmute yourself, please.
Hi, guys. Let me also thank each of you, Carmen, Tim, and Joe, for joining Tri-Faith for this important conversation. Tri-Faith Initiative is a religion-focused organization. We're very unique. There's nothing like it yet in America. What do you as community leaders see as an evolving role for Tri-Faith to play in our years to come?
Yeah, I would just say, Bob, I think this is part of it, is that we need organizations like Tri-Faith to assist and help organizations through this journey. Because if we, as a white leader, if I just use my background and history, that's not going to help, I don't think, the organization that I lead in the future. And so to bring in these conversations that Joe just talked about, and that Tri-Faith is interested in helping organizations grow and develop, it's that kind of conversations that are going to be really helpful, is to help organizations begin to find ways to have those discussions and dialogues within the organization, really to develop the how and the what's around what organizations need to be doing.
Carmen?
I would say, Bob, one, just the mere presence, the physical space, the beauty of the space, and I think the symbolic nature of the space in and of itself creates an environment for these conversations to be had. So you could, I think, walk into any one of the buildings here and have your own perception, but I think just by the very nature of the physical presence opens possibilities for learning and understanding. And I know that, you know, the community, the coming together of community is also very intentional. And so I think that there is, you know, Wendy took me to the beautiful space that looks out over the campus. And, you know, how can you not be open to a conversation? How can you not be open to the possibility? So I think the facilities and the physical presence alone will go a long way for helping us convene people and convene these conversations. So I'm excited that we're having this virtual kind of dual event and for the things that are to come, because I know that Tri-Faith will have a lot of impact in our community and help us evolve.
Any additions?
Carmen continues to be hard to follow,
I'm
but I would agree with that. I think there are places in the world and in this country and in this community where people are divided by faith. And here's a real life example of it can be a difference. So I think the presence is a huge point.
Thank you. Any questions from our in-person audience? Go for it. Jeremy, speak up.
I was thinking about the story about the tomatoes, and one thing that I noticed is soil needs to be healthy first. Otherwise, the truth is that the first crop won't work out. Right? So I'm really asking, what would being proactive before the issue comes up, right? What would the proactivity around this conversation look like?
So just to make sure that our audience online can hear, Jeremy referenced the need for fertile soil and asked what proactive measures might help to prepare the soil.
Right. Yeah, so I'll just give you a couple examples. We've taken 100 and I'll say 50, Joyce Cooper has the exact number, but let's say 150 white males, white male leaders at OPPD through what we call White Municipal Diversity Partners. And it's really a deep dive about understanding white culture, white privilege, but also around racism, sexism, and homophobia. And in that conversation is also a discussion about religion and international perspectives and biases. And it's really an opportunity for individuals to really do that deep dive and have that conversation. It's not something that I would have gotten in high school or college or a master's degree. But it is a self-exploration and an opportunity for a group of 15 or 17 folks to get together and have a conversation about what that means and what that is and what they are going to do about that differently as they go back into the workplace. That has really begun to soften the soil, I think, for leaders in the organization. And that's why we're seeing, I believe, changes in our diversity profile within multiple levels of the organization. Because we're having discussion, we're having the conversation. Leaders are now equipped to be able to talk about homophobia, to talk about gay and lesbian activity, about the pride flag, about the reason why we have a legacy program of 90 diverse young high school students working at OPPD and engaged at OPPD. And it's giving them the tools to be able to do that. But it's also the self-exploration where you go, oh my God, I do have these biases built in that I have to be conscious of as a leader and what I'm going to do differently about that. And that's how we're beginning to soften that soil and begin to fertilize it differently. And then at least the conversation that we've had is begin to cascade that throughout the organization. The gatherings, both from women professionals and professionals of color, is really also around that conversation as well, to give them cohorts of support within the organization as well. So that work, I think, needs to continue. It can continue in a number of different ways, but I think that's what organizations need to think about. And those are significant commitments that organizations need to make. But I can tell you, a farmer, if they're in this business of planting tomatoes, they're going to make sure that soil is in the best condition that it can possibly be. And that's what I think needs to happen.
Joe, we'll let you go next.
Thanks. Thank you for that opportunity. A number of years ago, I was part of a program that brought groups of folks together in Omaha, racially and ethnically diverse groups, to have dinner. Strangers, and they would have dinner together. They would talk about race in Omaha. And there was a kind of a consistent pattern. When I would ask folks, how is Omaha regarding race? All the white folks would say, it's pretty good. And the people sitting across the table would be kind of shocked at what they heard. I think one of the things that makes it hard to do what we want to do is that we don't know each other. we're not talking to each other, we don't understand each other's experience. And I think that's around race, it's around socioeconomic status, it's around religion and faith. And so again, one of the reasons why I think this organization is so important is because it's inviting people together to share their stories, to build relationships, to build trust. I think that's such an important part of doing this work. Until I understand what other people are experiencing, I don't know how to be a part of the solution. And so I think that and it's slow. It takes time to build relationships and build trust, but I think it's so critical.
So in our pre-planning call, Carmen and I shared our love for gardening. So I'm particularly interested in this metaphor related to your thoughts on this, because I know that you have a love for gardening and a love for this work. So where's that intersection? You must think about this.
I do, and I have another metaphor using a potato. The Great Potato Famine was because there was a single potato that was planted, and it wiped out the potato crop in Ireland. And if there was diversity in the potatoes, right, there would have been a greater chance that the entire crop would not have failed in the famine, would not have occurred. I think that, as Joe said, it's inviting people in. And so when I think about what I hope for our community, and as I continue to see our community grow and develop, that we are creating more spaces where more people are invited to participate. So again, I think what you're doing here is a perfect example of that. But I also think of it in terms of businesses and restaurants and you know, the connectivity. There is a lot of work, you know, that can happen to attract, but what gets people to stay? It's the relationships, it's the feeling connected, it's having places where I know I can go and express my faith, or I know I can go and you know, be with people that are like me, but I can also feel comfortable participating and going to places and spaces where I might today not feel very welcome. You know, so how do we evolve and cultivate the ground? So from a community building standpoint, we're inviting people in, and that we're being intentional in enabling more people to participate in all of the great things that are happening in our community and all the great development that's happening in our community.
So if you're curious and want to continue this conversation, we have a podcast. It's called Religion at Work. It's available on all of the channels that you find podcasts on. There are 5 episodes currently and more coming. I encourage you to learn more about our work, because it is those seeds that we are planting here in the work. Also, thank you so much for those who showed up today. And I hope that you all feel an invitation to bring your friends and colleagues into this space to be inspired to continue these conversations with us. And with so much gratitude, thank you for joining me today for this conversation. It is, as we regather, it reminds us that this is really just the beginning, right? This is our official grand opening of this space. So thank you for bringing your blessings and your beautiful thoughts to share with us today. Thank you all for showing up. Enjoy the rest of the day.